and they're all political science. We don't do anything else. Let's shut the door here. All right. This is just letting you know that if you're interested in doing Archer, it's due on the 15th of February. All right, those of you who don't know, Archer Fellowship, this means they pay you a decent amount of money to go to Washington, D.C. for the semester. You have an internship at usually some sort of a think tank, but it's a good experience. And I think you get 15 hours of political science upper division credit, right? So if you do that, you only have like, what would it be? Just a couple of more classes, right? Other than that. So that's why some people like to do it. Also get your foot in the door in DC if you want to work in DC. God help you, right? If you want to work in DC, but there it is. Usually they'll set you up with a good internship. Previous people where they've worked, I think Crystal worked at Department of Education. Obi worked at Andy Biggs's office. He's a member of the House. I'm trying to think of the other ones. I can't off the top of my head. But most of them have good internships. They really like it. They're all paid internships too, which is really, really good for that sort of work. So it's all available there. You need letters of recommendation. So if you're going to do it, you got to let me know pretty quickly. As my schedule gets a little bit tight, and it's going to be tight this semester with a lot of stuff going on. So, so if you're interested in that, feel free to shoot me an email. They do have some requirements on it. You do have to write a policy brief. But other than that, it's not a bad gig. There's a lot worse gigs out there. So, all right. Other things. Something, but I forgot. Okay. All right. If I forgot, it could have been too important. All right. First thing we're going to do today, though, is we're going to start with a map. Because I have a feeling very, very few people know what China actually looks like, right? If I said, name this city and where it's at in China, you go, what? I don't even know how to pronounce that, much less where it is. So some of the things that we're going to talk about today are going to kind of require, let me go ahead and post this to Teams as well, so I can get that on there too. Okay. Share it to Teams. All right. Everybody can see it now too. Here's a map, right? Like I told you before, it's a big, big place, right? That's Japan, right? South Korea, North Korea, right? Good Korea, bad Korea, right? You can call it either way. Here is what we would call the northeast of China. Okay, and what you'll realize real quick, this right here, it's Russia. Okay, it's Siberia. Okay, there's Mongolia, but even to the left, right? Kazakhstan, right? Majority Muslim. Kyrgyzstan, majority Muslim. India, right? So that gives you a sense of how big it really is, right? Is that we're going from Japan to India. And also when we get into the other parts of the semester, whenever we go into it, it'll have, we'll realize why there's a bunch of Muslims out here, right? And you're going to see why Islam is actually a deal out there. And there's our Taiwan, right? That's the one that gets all the play in American politics, right? Whether we recognize Taiwan or we don't. It definitely won't happen now that Biden's become president, but under Trump, it was always a threat to China, right? That we'll diplomatically recognize them as their own state. And so there you go. Okay, so for what we're going to talk about today, Beijing is right here, okay? It's in the, what we would call is kind of the northeast, okay? And then we're also going to talk about Nanking, right, which is right here. What's going to happen is Chiang Kai-shek, he's going to try to move the capital, and he does actually, and he does move it. But you're going to see why here is this little strait right here, okay, see, this is what we would call the Yangtze Delta right there. That's Shanghai right there. That's a huge ass city, okay? This area right here is what we call a megapolis. It is probably has 20, 30, 40 million people that live in that area, okay? So it's very important. As you can see, it has immediate access to the Sea of Japan, right? To get out going that way. Beijing is actually, you got to take it a ways just to get there, okay? Nanking, Shanghai, all these other places, they're right there. And then now for current events trivia, Wuhan, right? Something happened there, didn't it? That's where the alleged coronavirus came from, right? It was from Wuhan, from a Wuhan market, right? Right there, okay? So you see it all around here, right? How big it is, how long it is. And so when we talk about going from the north to the south of Shanghai, check, and also whenever he's going to try to move Beijing, or move the capital from Beijing to Nanking over here, why that's so important, right? Is because it's in a different part of the country, and it's got different ideas. It's a lot more, it's less traditional than Beijing's going to be. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to show you this, right? And there's Nepal, right? India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Vietnam, Laos, all those areas. And so, yeah, it's a lot of border to cover, right? And so, and this should give you the idea too. This is why, you see North Korea there. That's why China props them up. Because if this state fails, they're going to go right across the border, right? And they're going to go, and there's going to be millions and millions of refugees straight into their border. They can't go anywhere else other than South Korea. And most probably will go to South Korea, but a huge chunk will go that way, okay? And so that's why whenever you hear about China props them up, why would they prop them up other than just being, they're not even really ideologically similar anymore. North Korea being Stalinist and them being kind of a semi-planned command economy, right? But that's why, right? That border right there is where bad things can happen. So, all right, does that make sense? To give you kind of a sense of the area there. I think you can drive it from, Beijing to Kashi over there in Kyrgyzstan, but I'm not sure about that if there's an actual, if you can actually get there by car. But I suspect now you can. Probably back whenever we were doing some, some of the stuff we're talking about, you couldn't. So there we go. All right, let me put up our lecture slides. Okay. So this is gonna go. All right. So that, did that. Okay, this is where we're at. Okay, so whenever we last thing, Chiang Kai-shek, he was trying to move. Well, he wasn't trying to move. He was trying to take his northern expedition and go and take over all of that area, right? He's going to unite us all as one, as the Chinese people, right? Even though we can see how far away things are and how it's not really going to work that well, okay? Eventually, they're going to settle in Nanking, okay? Nanking will be the subject of something we'll talk about probably maybe this time, maybe next time, the rape of Nanking, right? And if you haven't heard about it, it was bad. It was really, really bad what Japanese soldiers did there, okay? But it was known for in the South, its business connections to the outside world and access to raw materials, okay? It was close to ports, closer than Beijing was. And it allowed for, it was more westernized as well. It had more people coming in, easier routes. And so it tended to be more connected to businesses, okay? More than farming and agricultural life. And remember, that's what Guomindang's trying to do too. They also want to I don't say westernize, they'll say modernize China, okay? Those educated abroad, those with ties to commerce and industry, and those with military and or secret society bases, okay? If they had access to Western education, these type of things, they became a part of that government. Okay? That's going to be totally different than the Communist Party, okay? They're not interested in this. Okay. All right, and it's why this big riff here, right? It's not here yet, but you're going to see it in Mao's China, right? Where there's a huge distrust of intellectuals, and it'll end up being the Cultural Revolution, right? Where tons of intellectuals were massacred in China in the 60s. Okay, and so there we go with that. All right. We talked about it a little bit last time, but in the Northern Expedition, Chiang Kai-shek, we don't know really when he decides this, but he is really upset with the communists, okay? He does not like them, and he just starts slaughtering them. Remember, before this, they were kind of a team, okay? They were anti-imperialist, they tend to kind of go together, but with the communists really focused on radical social reform, and Guomindang not really being as interested in that, okay? More interested in setting up society, okay? Chiang Kai-shek's break with the communists marked a strategic shift in the approach to the international arena as well. By turning against the CCP, Chiang and Guomindang cut themselves off from future aid from Moscow, okay? Remember that before this, they were kind of buddies with the Soviet Union. I think your book calls about Jaffe coming across, right, under the old days of sun, right? And he comes across the border and they're like, hey, here's some money to go get this, right? If the older term of it is called having snow on your boots, right? It means that you are connected with Russia. And so you would definitely say that of Sun. So, but when you go and you kill all the communists, right? The Soviet Union is not going to be okay with that. And they weren't. And it basically meant no more support from the Soviet Union. And in some ways that was fine, but as we get through this course, you realize that the Soviet Union wasn't on great terms with the Chinese Communist Party either, okay? We think of them as ideologically the same, but they are different brands and different strains of communism. And they don't really want to be in that manner, okay? All right. They could do this because with CCP help, they had captured Shanghai and the Yangtze region, which held a large percentage of the economy's modern industry and wealth. Okay, they're set out in Nanking, right? Which is that delta area I was showing you when we say Yangtze Delta, okay? That's where all the money is. That's where all the industry is. They don't need the small pittance that the Soviet Union is bringing across the border, okay? Now, the other part of it is, I think sometimes whenever we say Soviet Union, you think of that country that was able to challenge the United States during the Cold War, okay? This is 1926. The Soviet Union is only 10 to 12 years old. It's not as powerful as we kind of think of it during the Cold War as, right? Where they can stand toe-to-toe with the United States. They don't get that until after the war, right? They don't even have Stalin's first four-year plan or anything like that at this point. And so sometimes whenever we think of, oh, well, they turned down all this Soviet help, it might not have been as much as we would think in our minds, right? As the Soviet Union being able to help, okay? All right, so they're taking over the most wealthiest part of the country, so they don't really need the help they think, okay? Maybe not. They do this for about a decade, okay? They're out in Nanking for about a decade and kind of ruling, as we'll see that Japan was taking over things at the time. And then when we get to it a little bit further here, you're going to see that the Japanese just decided they were tired of any Chinese governance that wasn't directly responsible to the Japanese Empire. Okay. Because of the overall weakness of the central government, significant experience in social and economic reform occurred in various locales, especially in rural counties. Okay, what happens is, and this is a big thing in China, because as we get further in the semester, you realize that there is actually democracy on the ground level in China. Okay, at the local small level, there are elections, right? Whether they're free and fair is always some subject of controversy, but it's not command. Okay, it's not pure authoritarianism, and so this is where it comes from, right? This is one of these kind of strands in Chinese history and Chinese sort of political development, is that localities are able to do what they want largely. Okay. And that's why it's going to set up for having, at least to some of the reformers' minds, oh, this place could be a democracy, right? To be honest, I think that's fool's gold, right? To think that China is ever going to just suddenly become a democracy and have open elections. You know, the Communist Party is never going to allow that. But there is that going on there. Okay. All right. But internal weakness, domestic opponents and foreign adversaries limited the Gongdong success during this period. All three challenges, moreover, were interrelated. Okay, what happened was they had this nepotism, corruption, and its emphasis on correct speech. Okay, say the right thing rather than do the correct thing. We have that in our jobs all the time, right? You definitely can't speak your mind 100% of the time. Well, this permeated all the way through society. Okay. That idea that you don't want to upset someone, you want to make sure that you're not going out of bounds here, okay? And it caused a lot of corruption, a lot of nepotism. Whenever someone else would come in, they'd fire everyone and put their cousins or their aunts or their uncles in power, and it led to major problems there, okay? All right. Here's the other thing is, he also had to wage constant warfare to keep various warlords at bay. Our warlords are not going away, right? They are a part of China, okay? Especially during this time. They feel like they're getting slighted. He's always trying to keep them at arm's length, okay? No matter what. But for some reason, Chiang Kai-shek became it's to the level of obsession, right? With exterminating the communists, right? He is not a fan, okay? He wants to get rid of the communists. And he starts a bunch of annihilation campaigns against the communist-based areas. Your book talks a little bit about 3 or 4 of these not working, right? And then a 5th one really working, okay? But that was the idea, is that they needed to go in and they needed to exterminate. Okay, I know that sounds like a bad word, right? We don't exterminate people, right? I mean, generally. Okay, I mean, that's, but, you know, you got a roach problem, you call the exterminator, right? If you have a communist problem, you don't call an exterminator, right? But Chiang Kai-shek thought that this was the way to go, okay? That he's going to go and try to do this through annihilation campaigns, okay? This is going to piss people off, even in Guangdong, okay? It pisses them off too, because remember, they started as an anti-imperialist party. And what happens is Japan keeps on getting further and further inroads into China. They start taking over more things. They start being more aggressive. And so his constant attention to killing all the communists, right, and exterminating the communists took away from it, okay? And during the late 1920s, he stops paying attention to imperialist Japan, which is a problem, okay? In 1931, the Japanese military seized the entire Northeast, okay? And split it off into a Japanese puppet state named Manchuria, okay? That's crazy, right? That's where they're supposed to be running. Remember, the Northeast is where they already have their base of power, right, from before. And they get run out of there by the Japanese imperialists, right, by the Japanese army, okay? This should not be happening. But Chiang Kai-shek is more convinced that we got to kill all the communists. Okay, and so people got really frustrated with this. Okay, Chiang Kai-shek insists on destroying the communists rather than protecting the country against the Japanese. Okay, and remember, there's always that common thread in Chinese society of this anti-Japanese sort of rhetoric and behavior. Okay, it permeates all the way through it, and so it was extremely unpopular to just let the Japanese go do what they want and worry about the communists when this is something that's not that high a priority to most, even in the Guangdong. Okay. Here's the crazy thing. He gets captured. Okay. Chiang Kai-shek fancies himself. I'm trying to think of one of those Western European leaders during the day that used to go into actual battle with the troops. Napoleon, right? Who used to lead on the horse in the front, right? And you've all seen the painted picture, right, with Napoleon on there, right, going to the front. Well, Chiang Kai-shek figures himself to be one of these. So what happens is he ends up getting captured by his own people. Okay, one of his own military generals kidnaps him and a bunch of colleagues. Okay, and forces Chiang Kai-shek on penalty of death to stop trying to kill all the communists, join with the communists again in order to fight the Japanese. Okay? Chiang Kai-shek says, okay, right? Okay, we can do that. So after all this murdering and slaughtering and annihilation campaigns, they're going to get back together again. Okay? It's kind of like, I don't want to say that, maybe a little over the top. It's kind of like a person that treats you bad, your friend that treats you really bad, but then you end up always hanging out with them afterwards, right? Not good, okay? But that's what's going to happen under the threat of death. I don't believe that Chiang Kai-shek just changed his orientation. You know, those communists, I was kind of wrong about them. You know, they're okay, actually. That is not what happened, okay? When this happens, the Japanese take note, because they are pretty adept at what they're doing, okay? And they launch an all-out attack on China proper, driving Guangdong from its base in the rich lower Yangtze region deep into the country's impoverished interior. Okay, so remember, they're over here, they're wealthy, right? Everything's good, it's going right from our map, right? It's wealthy, it's good, it's good, it's good. Japan's up here for the most part, okay? They're gonna push down and then push them back this way. It cuts off their access to water, right? It cuts off their access to the shipping channels. It cuts off their access to raw materials. And it puts them in the middle of China, which is a bad place to be if you need money and things to fight a war, okay? It's hard to do. It's agricultural. It's not industrial, okay? Does that make sense? All right. What happens is the Japanese army really has its shit together. And it always did during that time. And what happens is that no matter what it is, the Chinese government, whether it was the communists or it was Kuomintang, they would have never been able to really fight back against the Japanese military. Once Tokyo decided, right, we're taking this, it meant it was going to be taken. And they were going to push forward no matter what. So from about 1938 to 1945, Japan occupies most of the key cities and major communication links throughout eastern China, right? Eastern being this area, right? All of that. If it controls that, it doesn't worry about the West, okay? Because remember, the Central's poor and impoverished, it's our agriculture going all the way over there. Japan, for the most part, doesn't want any part of that Nepal, Kyrgyzstan, you know, Kazakhstan. They don't want any part of that. And so they are very happy cutting off half of the country, okay? And saying, this is ours. We have all the materials in this country. You can go figure out how to try to live on your own, right? And so, and it would set up puppet governments throughout it. I think your book goes into a little bit of detail about them and how useless they were, really. They had Chinese leaders, but they just basically responded to the demands of Tokyo anyways. The other thing that we need to make kind of clear here is Japan didn't occupy areas, we think of this World War II period, right? And we think of, oh, they're going to occupy it like Nazi occupation of France, right? With, SS and everybody else on every single street corner, right? Under complete lockdown. That is not what Japan was doing. What they were doing was they were controlling cities, mostly through political means, but they also had the firepower if anyone tried to revolt, bad things would happen, okay? But they weren't they weren't as interested in that complete command because, again, Nazi Germany was going from city to city, right? Finding all the Jews, sending them somewhere else, right? You got to get rid of them. You got to purify, right? Japan wasn't that concerned with that. Okay, they were a little bit different. They're more imperialist than genociders. Okay, everyone okay with that? Great. Well, not okay with it, right? I mean, what a great time to be Chinese in a city, right? And I guess we'll go ahead and talk about it now. Nanking, okay? Nanking there is a famous book and there's movies about it. It's called The Rape of Nanking. I debated whether citing the book, but I didn't. So basically what happened was just weeks and weeks of just pure, unadulterated torture of the entire city by the Japanese military. The bayoneting of pregnant women, things like that, all through the city. In those couple of weeks in which it happened, they murdered at least 350,000 people. It could have been a lot more. I don't want to call it the funny part, but it's something that exists. Is in Japan, you see people say they didn't happen, right? Like they didn't have this. We literally have the documentary evidence here, dudes, right? But it's not that dissimilar from what we'd see sometimes in Western Europe and especially Eastern Europe and the Middle East of Holocaust denial, right? Where you have people go, oh, nothing really happened, right? I know the leader of Iran believes that the Holocaust didn't happen. He's a Holocaust denier, right? And so it was just a plot, right? It was a plot by the Jews, right? So it's a similar sort of vein of thinking in Japan, and it's not widespread, but there is that out there that, in Nanking, only like 20 or 30,000 people died. It's absolute bogus. It's closer to 350,000 people died during that. So you also see during this time when Japan is occupation, medical experimentation on live subjects, right? Very similar to the Third Reich as well. And also torture campaigns, okay? So this was not a great period. And when we talk about further in the semester, we're going to talk about why even after Japan's democracy, why do they still hate each other, right? And a lot of this is still going back to that. And you'll see it. They'll demand things because of this, okay? All right. Chiang Kai-shek is kind of a gambler, okay? At one point, we don't know exactly when, but sometime in 41, Chiang Kai-shek decided that he would count on foreign forces to win the war. He said, you know what? I'm not going to win this, and I'm not going to waste troops trying to win this, okay? The Americans are going to come here. We would think it would be months after Pearl Harbor, right? Chiang Kai-shek probably made the correct assumption that if the United States, he probably made this one, he probably thought, okay, one or two things are going to happen. Either somehow Japan's going to defeat the Americans, okay? And if they did that, you definitely don't want to be on the side of the Americans after they lose, right? Or the Americans are going to win this, and they knew the tactics of the Japanese anyways. They knew how brutal they were, and they knew that they would have to go door to door to expel Japan from China, okay? So why waste troops in this fight? America's going to have to come in here and clean it out either way. Or they're going to lose, and Japan's already here anyways. So we might as well not fight that hard, okay? Why use our troops when Americans are willing to die for this, okay? That seems crazy, right? But you also saw that sort of mentality in southern Vietnam too in the 60s, right? Where the South Vietnamese basically said, well, they're going to send 60,000 Americans to die. Why should I die, right? And so it was the same sort of thinking there, okay? What he was doing is he knew that the government hadn't been going well. They had these corruption issues. They had all these other issues. It was going to be tough to fight off the communists if the United States won the war. And the reason being, people were going to side with the communists after all that had been done. And so he basically said, hey, I need to save my troops for when I'm going to go and try to exterminate the communists again. Okay. And that's what he did. Okay. Any questions about that? Inflation became widespread, corruption became endemic, and the spirit disappeared. Intellectuals who had come to fight basically said, oh, there's no hope, that type of thing. Okay. So there's an entire collapse of sort of the Guomindang. Okay. Whenever we read about it kind of in history books, we tend to think that oh, Guomindang was a powerful entity, and the communists were more powerful and then pushed them all the way to Taiwan. That's not the way it really was. They were more in tatters. Okay. And so there we go with that. All right. Against this background, America's unexpectedly rapid defeat of Japan in 1945. China in no way thought that they would make Japan surrender by 1945, because that's a quick turnaround for the amount of power that Japan had and the amount of land area that they had. Okay. Okay, and let's think about it here. In the United States government in 1945, 1946, 1947, are we fans of the communists? An open communist party? Absolutely not. Okay? The United States is going to try to cast their lot with the Guomindang. Okay? They're going to try, because they're not communist. You already see containment, right? Containment being you need to contain communism from spreading, that sort of thing, being a central part of American foreign policy. And so they have to know immediately that they're about to get some support. Okay? And what happens is Guomindang was put back in control of the cities, basically. Once they drove the Japanese out, the United States tried to put them back in the cities and say, hey, go run this. Okay? Instead of returning property confiscated by Japan to its Chinese owners, Guomindang simply took over the property. Okay? Oh, that's ours now. Okay? They didn't do what they were supposed to. Nationalist officers and politicians gorged themselves on the relatively wealthy Eastern urban economy, producing levels of corruption that soon undermined popular support. And so in 46, 47, 48, nobody really likes them. Okay? All right. The other part of it is that not unlike other places after World War II, you know, the United States is the only place where things were really good after World War II, almost immediately, right? Europe, I mean, it was just demolished, you know, from all of the fighting for years and years. China, a disaster. Japan, a disaster, right? There's 2 atomic bombs that have been dropped, right? This is a disaster zone, most of the world, based on this war. The only place where it really wasn't was the United States. So we always have this thing of these booming 50s, right? And then it's kind of going great and good things are going and we're doing good. Everywhere else is a disaster. Rampant alcoholism, no spirit, no anything, okay? And China was no different. When you take the Japan cuts, we'll talk about all the suicide rate in Japan from 45 to 50, and you'll go, whoa, how many people were killing themselves, right? China didn't have the same amount because they don't have the sort of cultural, let's just say, affinity for suicide that Japan does. I mean, Japan's got a suicide forest, right? Where people just go commit suicide in suicide packs, right? It's all kind of cool, right? And so a lot of this tore at the social fabric, okay? And it's gonna have to be rebuilt somehow. And they think it's gonna have to be a strong state, which opens it straight up for a command economy communist party, right? That wants to command all of the means of production, how it's going to work. And then next time we'll start with that as they take over in 49, okay? Any questions? No? Have a good weekend then. Don't do anything I would do and you should be okay.